Hello and welcome, I'm Ali Mustafa and this is Strait Talk. Can Turkey's approach to major global issues help the EU? Turkey's president thinks so after another blow to Turkey's EU membership bid. And Daesh is defeated in its stronghold of Raqqa. But is it really a victory for Syria? Turkey's President Erdogan has said the idea of European civilization has ended. The criticism comes at a time when the EU is set to reconsider accession funds earmarked for Turkey. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has previously called for an end to Turkey's EU bid. Omer Kablan reports.
These are some of the countries in the European Union. This is a candidate country of that bloc. It's been trying to get into the EU for the last 30 years. But accession talks are frozen.
The EU has cut pre-accession funding to Turkey, yet talks to bring Turkey into the fold have not formally ended. It may be an indication that relations are heading towards a dead end, and President Erdogan says Turkey does not need the EU.
European Union leaders met in Brussels for a summit aimed at moving Brexit talks forward and discussing trade. But a lot of the discussion revolved around the bloc's future relationship with Turkey.
Einig waren wir in zwei Dingen. Erstens, dass wir die Kommission bitten, die Vorbeitrittshilfen in verantwortbarer Weise zu kürzen. Ganz zum Schluss anbelangt gibt es den Wunsch, nicht einfach die Brücken abzubrechen, sondern irgendwo auch mit der Türkei in Kontakt zu treten. Wir haben jetzt erstmal die Kommission gebeten, uns Vorschläge zu machen.
But communication seems to be deteriorating further. To find out more about this complex situation, I went to the Economic Development Foundation in Istanbul. I met Professor Çiğdem Nas, who's dedicated more than 15 years of research to the issue.
It is becoming more and more difficult for Europeans to understand Turkey and Turkey to understand how Europeans approach the issues, especially Turkey's fight against terror, especially in the southeast and also against the Gülenist organization. The EU is more than just a strategic alliance for Turkey, I think. It is also a model of governance. If in the near future we see a Europe which has turned inwards, which has become more xenophobic, where ultra right-wing parties are in government, then of course Europe may lose this appeal.
An appeal, it seems, already lost on President Erdogan.
Avrupa Bosna'da ölmüş, Suriye'de gömülmüştür. Sahile vuran masum çocuk bedenleri ise Batı medeniyetinin mezar taşlarıdır. Bunu böyle biliniz.
In the same speech, the Turkish president also said that if Europe wants a solution to its social problems, it should embrace Turkey in the EU. A proposition that, despite the odds, is still possible. Omer Kablan, Strait Talk.
And for more on this, I'm joined by Hale Shashmaz, who is the executive coordinator at Bosphorus Global. It's a research group that fact-checks global news coverage of Turkey, and by Dr. Emre Gönen. He's an international relations professor at Istanbul Bilgi University, specializing in EU-Turkey relations. Let's begin with you, Dr. Emre. Recently, Turkey's EU Minister Ömer Çelik said that the intention, or EU's intention, to remove these pre-accession funds and aid to Turkey doesn't mean anything for Ankara. What does he mean?
He probably tries to turn down a little bit the conflictual dialogue between the EU and Turkey. And obviously, this kind of money will not have a real incidence on the Turkish economy. The symbolism, on the other hand, could be much more important.
Tell us, Hale, what is it about Turkey that the EU is now or can't fathom?
Well, I think the minister's statement has to do with the disappointment Turkey has with the process in the EU talks. Turkey has been making a lot of effort in the last years, since the beginning of 2000, since the accession talks and before as well. And Turkey is expecting communication, it's expecting cooperation and coordination, and what it sees is just criticism and threats of cutting of funds, and I think Turkey finds this very unfortunate and unfair.
Well, there is some sort of mixed messaging that is coming from the EU as well. On the one hand, you have the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Federica Mogherini, who's saying that the EU wants to cooperate with Turkey on regional dynamics or issues related to regional dynamics. But then you have Angela Merkel, who says that talks and accession talks with Turkey should be cut and should end. So why this mixed messaging from Europe?
Well, first of all, Germany speaks for Germany, and they wanted really to sever this accession talks, which, by the way, do not exist really. I mean, they are on the table, but they remain de facto frozen for a number of years already. But the other member states did not follow Germany on this path, and even Germany, I do not think that they can really contemplate a cutting off of relations with Turkey.
What is the future then? What kind of relationship can we expect between Turkey and the EU moving forward if things don't go well?
That's the trouble. In the EU founding agreements, you have two statuses. Either you become a member state or you stay a third state. So there is no really institutional place like a candidate country or a country poised to become a member state. If Turkey will remain a non-member state, there should be something else. This something else doesn't exist. So basically this is the inner functioning of the EU which has put the whole situation into a dead end, you know.
I'd like to interrupt.
Hale, please go ahead.
I think Turkey is it's a strategic ally for the EU, and I don't think, despite disagreements and disputes, I don't think the EU countries want to lose Turkey on this. It's a very important ally for them. And if we look at the history of EU talks, there have been ups and downs throughout the entire process, as you've given some examples.
Hale, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're talking about strategic alliance. Let's listen to what Gulnur Aybet, who's a senior advisor to the Turkish president, had to say about Turkey's EU plans. Let's take a listen.
EU membership is written into Turkey's 2023 plan. So it's really part of the reforms and the way this country wants to go. But we're actually seeing a different kind of attitude from the EU for some time, actually. But recently it's been a little bit more bizarre than usual because the EU, some EU states have chosen to interfere directly in Turkish politics.
Hale, Turkey, as Gulnur was saying, is still committed to joining the European Union, but she also said that they're getting a different attitude, a not receptive attitude from the European Union. Should Turkey still push to be part of the European Union, given that union's fractured nature currently with Brexit and what's happening in Spain and Catalonia?
I think yes, it is, and it has shown its political desire to become a member of the EU, both in the past and today. If you look at the statements made by Turkish politicians, we can see Turkey's commitment to revitalize the relations with the EU. But unfortunately, Turkey is really disappointed with the EU member states' attitude towards Turkey. What it feels is a double standard against Turkey. There's this criticism: Turkey is moving away from European values. But if you look at this situation in Turkey needs some context. Turkey is facing unparalleled circumstances today. There's a civil war on its border, the Syrian civil war. It survived a coup attempt last year, which resulted in the death of 249 people. It's fighting against terrorist groups beyond its borders in Turkey. And I just like the European countries to put themselves in Turkey's position for a second. And we have the example of France, for example, if we're going to talk about moving away from European values. France announced a state of emergency in 2015 and it extended it 6 times. And just last week, French Parliament adopted an anti-terrorism bill which normalizes exceptional powers used under state of emergency into ordinary law. And unfortunately, we don't hear much criticism about this from the EU member states. This is really upsetting.
You're talking about terrorism in Turkey as well as in Europe. Now, Europol, which is an extension of Interpol, has come out with a report on trends, terrorism trends inside Europe, and part of it, a group that it identifies, is the PKK. And if I can quote from the report, it says that Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Romania, and Switzerland reported that the PKK continued its fundraising, propaganda, and recruitment activities in those countries. In addition, Switzerland stated that the PKK were maybe running a number of ideological training camps for its youth in remote pre-Alpine areas. So Turkey has concerns, and it seems that Europeans acknowledge that concern in their own reports. So why aren't they acting on this, and why is the gap with Turkey then growing, Doctor?
For the PKK terrorism, it is closely related to the Kurdish question, especially after the coup d'etat in 1980 in Turkey. There has been a terrible pressure upon the Kurdish culture and speaking and everything. And during that period of time, in the European countries, there has been a very deep sympathy against the so-called liberation movement for Kurds. And it remained there. And I do not believe that it has very drastically changed since, despite all the developments in Turkey. This shows perhaps our shortcomings in international relations and in the international arena to express what has been done in Turkey for the Kurds. But definitely this is moving from a Kurdish problem towards a PKK problem. The PKK today has no reason to exist so far as they know that this is majorly a chiefly terrorist organization, and they have all these ramifications in their own country. They should probably take some physical measures to prevent it.
Dr. Goren, I'm afraid we're running out of time. Emre Gonen and Hale Shashmaz, thank you so much. Caught red-handed. That's how Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan described US support for YPG militants in Syria. Now, they're the ones who helped recapture Raqqa, making up the majority of the US-backed SDF fighting force. But right after taking over Raqqa, the YPG raised banners of the leader of the PKK terror group that has killed thousands of Turkish citizens. It's called into question who exactly will control Raqqa in the future. For now, many are seeing Daesh's defeat as a major victory. But it's come at a high price for civilians, as Courtney Keeley reports.
It's a Syrian folk song. It's a song connected to our culture that Daesh tried to destroy.
Sarmad remembers the day in January 2014 that Daesh seized control of Raqqa as its self-proclaimed capital.
I would rather bear the pain because sometimes a person can sacrifice himself to take away the pain of a whole city.
With about 90% of Raqqa reduced to rubble, most of it will remain uninhabitable for months. Whole neighborhoods are booby-trapped with explosives rigged by retreating Daesh fighters. Its citizens, hundreds of thousands, remain scattered in displacement camps while others seek asylum overseas. Mohammed and Sarmad escaped to Germany. Wanted by Daesh as well as Bashar al-Assad's regime, we met in an undisclosed location to talk about their ongoing activism. They first insisted on serving a generous home-cooked meal. Still harrowing details seeped out. Mohammed described the birth of his eldest daughter. His wife was forced to deliver her with her face fully veiled by a cesarean section without anesthesia. The doctors warned her that if she cried out, Mohammed would be arrested.
How do you feel these days, especially with Raqqa being, quote, liberated?
Occupation, not liberation.
It's occupation, not liberation.
Many Syrian Arabs were horrified at the sight of the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, comprised of mainly Syrian Kurds, posing in the center of Raqqa with a photo of Abdullah Öcalan. He's the imprisoned leader of the PKK, considered a terrorist group by Turkey, the EU, and the US.
They replaced the picture of Baghdadi with that of Öcalan. They just put a tyrant in place of another.
Allegiances remain murky on the ground. This video shows a well-known Daesh singer known as Hamadi singing to celebrate the SDF forces. Sarmad and Mohammed stay in close contact with Syrians, working with their organization Sound and Pictures to counter messages of radicalization. This graphic novel, created and distributed by the group, tells a story of young people's courage to publicly protest. They say they'll keep working for as long as it takes.
Do you have a clear dream of rebuilding the whole city?
Of course, we always have dreams. If we stop dreaming, we stop life. So we always dream to rebuild our country, our cities, not only Raqqa or Deir ez-Zor. We're dreaming and rebuild Syria, the free Syria that we demand and we ask for in 2011.
Courtney Keeley, Strait Talk.
And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Yasir Tabara. He's a board member of the Umran Center for Strategic Studies here in Istanbul, and Sinan Hetahet, who is a senior associate fellow at the Al-Sharq Forum. Thank you so much for being here. Yasir, let's begin with you. Is the destruction in Raqqa an acceptable cost for defeating Daesh?
Well, what is an acceptable cost for the loss of thousands of human lives and the almost complete destruction of an entire city? Some have likened the situation in Raqqa as it looks today to the leveling out of Dresden in Germany post-World War II. And I think that is definitely an unacceptable price for any purpose or any objective.
Sinan, is that a fair comparison?
Well, it is a fair comparison, but made by a party that has done equally worse in other parts of the country. We've seen same level of destruction in eastern Aleppo. We've seen also a continuous air campaign and airstrikes against civilians in Idlib, and with complete disregard of human lives. So this is maybe a true comparison, but coming from one of the worst parties in terms of human rights record in Syria.
Sinan, Yasir, you both are Syrians, originally from Syria. The war's been going on for 6 years now. Is this the worst destruction that we've seen?
No, not by any stretch of the imagination. You know, the Russians, who actually made the analogy with post-World War II Germany, have leveled big parts of the biggest city in Syria, which is Aleppo. In fact, the Russians have been short of being proud of implementing the Grozny approach to fighting terrorism, quote unquote, in cities like Aleppo, and helping a criminal, brutal regime regain some semblance of control over some of its lost territory. As we've seen in many, many reports, the cost of rebuilding Syria exceeds you know, the tens of billions of dollars. Some reports go to hundreds of billions of dollars. And so Raqqa is unfortunately another episode in that string of destruction. It's still remains to see who's going to own that broken piece and who is going to basically push in the direction of reconstruction. Having the Syrian Defense Forces led by the Kurdish militias of the YPG does not give me very good indications on where this is going.
Sinan, enlighten us. For the longest time, the US has been trying to rebrand the YPG, wanted to change its name officially to the SDF, which is this umbrella group, and most of the fighters are YPG fighters in it. So why would the YPG then reinforce things that the US is trying to move it away from, like putting up a banner of Abdullah Öcalan?
Well, I guess everyone has spoken about how this is a free provocation of Turkey, but really it's more a slap in the face of the US rather than anything else. This has been the main topic of divergence between Ankara and between Washington, and has been the subject of long discussions, and also some might say also the topic of the main latest differences between the two countries. And the United States stuck to its guns, and they said no, YPG is Syrian-led. It is also grassroots movement, and there is nothing to fear. But when we look at the lists of the people that get killed in action, most of them are not actually Syrians. They are PKK members that either are Turkish originally, or from Iraq, or even from Iran. So all of them part of the Kijak umbrella of PKK and its offshoots. So the numbers and facts do not lie in this sense. But really the most important thing that we have to keep an eye on is how they have been able to monopolize the security, the life, the social also infrastructure of the so-called Rojava area, and how they have prevented anyone, civilians, even those who are willing to work with them, to actually provide an alternative.
Very quickly, I want to know where this leaves the Syrian regime, Bashar al-Assad, who's been gaining a lot of territory. Yasser?
Well, I mean, this goes to the question of control without legitimacy, right? I mean, this is the story of the YPG in areas like Raqqa. You have the majority population of Arab populations that are now being forced to be under the military control of a non-Arab force, and that goes back to the Assad question, authority without legitimacy. Although I think in the case of Bashar al-Assad, we might see some concessions of land between some of the actors as part of a deal with the Russians to be under the control of the Assad regime. However, you have a major capacity issue that is not going to be fulfilled by the Assad regime because it has completely lost a lot of capacity over the past 6 years.
Finally, on Raqqa, it's almost a symbol, and it's quite reflective of what's happened across Syria with major towns and cities. Before the war started in 2011, Raqqa's population, the city's population, was around 200,000 people. Now it's estimated to be 45,000 people left in that city. What of the people?
Well, I'm even surprised there is 45,000 left in the city. I think that most of the inhabitants have fled the city during the fights, and then now are living very poor conditions into refugee camps across the region and near the Euphrates. And these camps looks more like concentration camps rather than anything else. They have been treated in a very bad way. They have been interrogated for long hours. They have been prevented from leaving the camps, even to join their families in other cities. And once again, the problem here is, how can we defend the rights of these people? How can we help them? How can we assist them? Because they have been labeled as ISIS sympathizers, and this is completely wrong. This has no solid ground, and it's very difficult to leverage a different approach to deal with the Raqqawi peoples because of the PYD strong control of the region, and most importantly, the U.S. support to this group.
Sinan Hatahet, Yasser Tabara, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Remove your hats. A high-profile event. 5 former U.S. presidents on stage to raise funds for Puerto Rico relief. George W. Bush cracks a joke, winning over the internet and leaving many to proclaim, Bush is back. At a speech in New York, he left political commentators and Democrats reminiscing.
It means that bigotry or white supremacy in any form is blasphemy against the American creed.
Ah, the good old days of Bush. But hold on a second. Let's rewind. This Bush? who led the war in Iraq on a lie?
Thanks to you, the Iraq we stand in tonight is dramatically freer, dramatically safer, and dramatically better than the Iraq we found 8 years ago.
Hundreds of thousands of people were killed during the US invasion, and it's been argued the instability that followed gave birth to Daesh. No, George, it's definitely not safer or freer.
Afghanistan is still just the beginning.
The war in Afghanistan turned out to be America's costliest and longest running ever. And according to some estimates, the Taliban still controls or contests 40% of the country. And let's not forget how much criticism Bush got for his response to Hurricane Katrina.
There's not a word to describe it.
The world saw parts of New Orleans looking like a refugee camp. And then there's the small matter of the US economy collapsing under his watch.
In recent weeks, as committee members are well aware, disruptions in financial markets have increased uncertainty.
The uncertainty led to a global financial crisis and the collapse of the US housing market. To WR's critics, his presidency was historically disastrous.
In all probability, he will go down as the worst president in the history of the United States.
But is that legacy already being forgotten?
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Mustafa. Until next time, take care and goodbye.